Sunday, and the lower half of the United States is in the red. I think that means it's hot out. I guess I could go outside and tell for myself, but it just looks hot out.
Well, that was random. Exceptional radio.
So there's this like massive low pressure system hanging out over the southern United States, I guess, and it's just pulling all this wet, warm air from the Atlantic in through the Gulf. It's actually quite pretty. I mean, on windy.
Had some pretty crazy weather this year already.
Yeah, I mean,
it's been severe. I guess it's part of the issues. Like the storms, when they hit, they're severe, and it'd be different if it was just like, dry rainfall, but it's like dry 4 months of rain in 2 hours.
apparently Texas is supposed to get anywhere from 5 to 10 inches over the next 4 days.
Not surprised.
They're supposed to get just pounded with rain, and then by Thursday, a low pressure system is gonna get pushed out by the high pressure system that's hanging out over like Florida, Atlanta, Mississippi, Louisiana, and so forth. All that area, Arkansas.
But why are these storms never signs when they hit like red states?
Well,
maybe Texas shouldn't be hateful during Pride Month, and maybe they wouldn't be hit by fucking floods, because that feels like a sign if we're gonna use their rhetoric.
I mean, simultaneously believing in acts of God while not believing in acts of God. That's I'm not even sure what that is.
Well, if you look at the weather patterns, it definitely looks like there's like a fucking typhoon forming.
Oh yeah.
I guess, yeah, it was probably a typhoon. But one of the problems is the weather patterns started to become so shifted and intense that we started getting tornadoes on like the East Coast, farther, like all the way north up as far as like Maine. I think it was like Delaware and Maine in the last bad storm system got tornadoes. Which
isn't that like too far north for that?
Yeah, that's they shouldn't be getting tornadoes that far north. And the issue is then when the wind speed gets to be so fast, where a storm came through Detroit and the wind speed got up to 95 miles an hour, where it wasn't a hurricane, but I think it's like 75 miles an hour where you start to get hurricane force winds. So it got to be beyond hurricane force, and it came through so fast where it was sunny, maybe half an hour before, and then it was sunny maybe 30 minutes after. So it's like the speed at which it came through and disappeared is on its own disconcerting, but when you're in it and the wind is moving that fast, but it's not a tornado, it feels like a gigantic tornado, and it also feels like a hurricane, but it's neither. And so when you get these extreme weather events that don't really fit into a known category, because it's like it's beyond gale force winds.
Well, that's definitely squarely in the realm of hurricane force winds on the Beaufort wind scale.
Right. But again, it's like it's hurricane force, but the only reason it's not a hurricane is because it's not rotating. And so there's no eye. You can't call it a hurricane if there's no eye. There's all these things that need to be present to qualify as a hurricane. So then when you get these hurricane force winds without a hurricane, like
Well, I mean, the Beaufort
what
scale
are we
is about
describing
wind
now?
force in general. It doesn't actually.
Right, of course.
That's
But I
just
mean like
crazy.
because okay,
No, I'm with you, man. Like this is one of those things. Like
they
it makes sense over giant bodies of water where there's temperature differentials that can change very rapidly, and then high and low pressure zones can move more freely. But over land masses where there isn't a lot of water, there's like virtually no water on land. What's causing this kind of temperature and pressure differential that makes these things happen?
and the
Where
only
where is it? Where
real
in the
name they
atmosphere is it
have is
happening?
racist. They call them squall lines, which is like, yeah, that's not something we should use. And it's like the um the extreme weather, I guess is I don't even know want to know if we can call it evolving. But the way it's progressing and becoming these new forms of things that we don't really have words for to describe accurately, and then have to use other forms of extreme weather to describe it. That's where it feels like we're in this gap of it's not even about the scientists so much as regular people refusing to accept that we have a new type of storm now that we don't even have a real word to describe, and it's so intense that when I caught it on video, I'm like, if I didn't have this video, people wouldn't believe that this shit happened the way it did, to the point where I sent it to one of the other people in the building and he was like, "Oh, I just shut the windows when that storm came in. I didn't want to look at it. I didn't want to see what was happening. I just closed the windows and just went in my room and laid down." Cuz it was like one of those things where everything's shaking and the wind is moving so fast and it's so loud that it was like it nobody's just gonna sit there and be comfortable in it. There's no human being, like the most sociopathic, psychopathic fucking person who has no feelings, still gonna be like, okay, maybe I should go into self-preservation mode somehow. Maybe I should like go under a doorway or something. Like you don't even know what to do because you it's
So like the first year after I got this house, the sunroom was still a sunroom. I had like a desk in here and a computer, but the windows were just storm windows. It was just barely a room. And we had a storm that I would learn was called a straight line wind, which is like a tornado that goes in a consistent direction, but it only lasts for maybe 10, 15 seconds. And it was howling. I saw the wind carry water up from the ground, and I was like just stuffing towels into the windows because it was just pouring in through the windows. It was crazy. And when I looked up and lightning and see wind carrying water up, I kind of had one of those moments where I thought, oh shit, I'm fucked. And then it stopped, and then the power went out, like everywhere, like up and down the street, and it was just calm as can be. Like it was there and it was gone. Like almost like it didn't happen, except for there was no electricity and some power poles had been snapped and some trees were down all over the road. What you described in the video that you shared, that was like sustained for a lot longer than what I experienced.
well, and I think it was about I want to say it was like 5 minutes sustained, and the front and the back were more intense than like the middle was more rain intensive, but the wind was more intense in the on the edges of the storm, and that's where it was. It like it was similar to what you described, except for the fact that it was so sustained that it was as if the entire column of the storm was also spanning um a row. Like if this was a spreadsheet, like
It would be the entire row.
right, the entire row as well. And that's where the way it was moving, it was basically a sideways tornado that was also moving in a straight line. But it was as if like an F5 tornado was on its side
Yeah.
and moving like that would be the way I would describe if that, except the only reason we can't determine if that's what was happening is because our radar only really get one layer at a time, and you can go through different layers of what's happening in the atmosphere, but to put them together in like a moving three-dimensional model takes a lot of processing, and they generally just don't process them
I
like
bet it
that
looks
because
like
the
a weird
storms.
multicolored cloud spectrogram that doesn't
Right.
quite make sense because there's no sense of scale. It'd just be some nebulous amorphous blob that's sitting in a rendered three-dimensional space that's still kind of a poor facsimile. I spent a lot of time looking at different Windy, you can actually select your a lot of like functions like the altitude that you're even taking your
Hmm.
measurements from, stuff like that. And it's really cool to look at, but it's really hard to abstract and make sense of because it's so dynamic. And I mean, realistically, I don't know what the difference between 2,000 feet and 5,000 feet and 10,000 feet. I can't actually conceptualize what that is. I know it's a lot, but it, I think it's difficult to even conceptualize how tall some skyscrapers actually are until you're right in front of them and you look up and it's like, man, I can't even see the top of that thing.
Yeah, it is. There's one that's getting built, and there's a crane on top of it. And from a distance, it looks big, but then when you're at the base of it, it's like, holy fuck. If
It's
that
even
crane
bigger.
fell and you're like staring up at it, like you wouldn't really have a chance to get out of even.
Even if you realized what was happening, it's
Yeah,
it's
you
so
wouldn't.
big.
Yeah, and the way it's like the scale just distorts your perception as a human. And I think, again, like you're saying, until you're right next to something, it's even it's easier to imagine something smaller than it even is when you're like, oh no, that's a skyscraper. I know it's huge, but then when you're next to it as a human, it's like, oh Jesus fuck.
It's
Like
really
what
huge.
yeah, like what caused people to start building these structures like this? I don't know. I don't know what became the impetus to go this route, but yeah, that shit, especially when those windstorms come through, because that's where I'm like, oh, that fucking crane, we were lucky it didn't get blown off.
So, so maybe in this last decade of temperature and climate shifting and all that stuff, really one of the things we're getting to experience now is an expansion of the tornado belt. Maybe that's the sign of things to come. Because, wait, you said Delaware, right? Wait, does
Yeah, I think that was.
Delaware
I know they went really like almost as far north as you could possibly go, because I want to say they had them in
like New
um
Hampshire or something, Vermont?
fucking Niagara Falls.
Oh shit, that's like the north end, or the I guess that's kind of in the middle of New York, on the kind of on the border. That's still really far up. Tornado Alley. That thing's expanded. Texas through Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, South Dakota, Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin. Oh, those are pretty far north.
Yeah,
Illinois,
tornadoes are not
Indiana.
supposed to be common in Delaware.
Yeah. Yeah. This visualization of where tornadoes happen does not include the eastern seaboard at all. Northeast corridor. Huh.
Yeah, there was a confirmation of a tornado touchdown in Maine, which, well, this one's from 4 years ago, but I know I saw one like recently too. So they're not they're happening in places where they're not supposed to
Oh,
be.
back in April. Back in April, it was reported 70 million Americans under severe weather threat from a northeast to Midwest. Sunday through Tuesday, hail, winds, tornadoes are expected. That was back in April, so New Jersey has a list of 182 confirmed tornadoes since 1950. That's like, a couple per year. Three, almost three per year. On average, 6 tornadoes touch down somewhere in the Northeast per year. So that's not that many. That's
Oh,
like that's like a
but
week. That's
the
like a week during
okay,
the summer in Indiana.
but here's the issue with that. There was like fuck, it was snow at the same time when those tornadoes were happening.
Tornadoes and snow. Wow.
Yeah, so there's been a phenomenon called thunder snow that has started happening. I mean, it's been happening, you know, over time, but started happening more frequently near the Great Lakes. And it would be, I think reported in Chicago more frequently than a lot of other places. But then they would get tornadoes in the fucking middle of the winter, or like on the edge of winter, where you're like, this isn't supposed
Oh
to be
yeah.
tornado season.
NOAA reported the U.S. was struck with more than 100 tornadoes and heavy snow in April of this year, and a lot of that stuff overlaps apparently, like a heck of a lot of it.
So yeah, Tornado Alley's definitely expanding, but
I don't think it's an alley anymore. Holy crap.
yeah.
So a picture for Snow Tornado 2024 brings back a bunch of really crazy looking, they look like clouds with a with like a needle pointing down into the ground. They look like extra robust tornadoes. That's what they look like. And then everything is just a white, wintry hellscape. I guess it's not a hellscape if it's cold. Yeah, that would be pretty
Oh,
terrifying.
okay.
Being
Oh,
out with like
here's
flying pieces of ice coming at you at like 100 plus miles an hour. That sounds like just horrible. Oh,
so there was a tornado um in Newcastle, Delaware last week. Or it was about 2 weeks ago now. 10 days. So um they they like said potential tornado and there was a warning. Um and I don't think they had confirmed the touchdown at first, but then Maryland confirmed the touchdown. And I think then somebody eventually confirmed that there was a touchdown in Delaware, but it just wasn't like confirmed at first. Yeah. Because okay, here's what's weird. There was also Delaware County, Ohio, but that was like the same storm system. So there's like that's why the searches are like coming up Delaware County, but also what's it called? New what's it called? Newcastle County
Mm.
in actual Delaware. Yeah. But again, that's where these places are.
Yeah, that's kind of an uncommon region. I don't know. When we went down to Florida and back in January, there was a tornado touchdown. I don't. I guess tornadoes happen around hurricanes.
Definitely in water spouts, but they get really bad thunderstorms, but tornadoes. And again, I think that's where yeah, you get tornadoes around hurricanes, but it's generally like because they're near the water, I think they get more of the bigger coastal storms and then the um tropical depressions.
Ugh. So it's have had a few nice days, right? But is that really isn't that really just like the calm before the storm kind of situation nowadays? We get a nice couple days where it's cool and it's not punishing to be outside, and then humidity or rain or punishing wind, any number of things that could happen at this point. Hail. I think we've had hail a couple of times this summer or spring. Hail warnings.
I mean, we're like 5 days from the solstice, so
I guess it's summer. It's summer. It's hot as fuck out. I'm serious. This map on Windy is just like oppressively red.
I'm like, you know, I think it feels like we're gonna have a very polarized summer just because it's like seems like it's gonna be hot, but also seems like there's gonna be a lot of humidity, which is gonna turn into rain. So
Yeah, and it's not going to go anywhere. It's just going to keep cycling.
yeah. So it feels like we're gonna have like a lot of floods on the coastal regions, which cools, but I don't know. It definitely, like I said, it definitely seems like we're gonna have some hot days too. But I feel like we've been pretty good about predicting the seasons before. Not, I don't even think it's about luck, just because the winters have. They're not always mild, but we've been pretty correct about the mildness of the winters. And then I think last summer too.
Yeah. I know it's supposed to be pretty sustained hot for the next week or two. Ugh. I guess it's the problem that I have, of course, is that I don't like being outside if the weather conditions are such that you have to stand still in the shade in hopes that you catch a breeze so that you don't like start overheating. And it's like that when we approach that wet bulb temperature, it's just there's no fun being outside when that happens.
Yeah, I think we are very much bound by our weather or fucking climate control. Cause yeah, I don't know if you've been to New Orleans, but that shit sucks to be outside. It's like instant swamp ass, instant fucking sweat everywhere. Your clothes are stuck to you. And then like Arizona is the exact opposite where you're like, oh, I'm dying because all of the water is leaving my body instantly.
Well, right now in Indiana, the wet bulb temperature is 72 degrees, and outside it's 89 degrees, which means that exposure time for being outside is probably not that long. Let's see here. What is the internet chart tell me? I have to click this thing so many times to get there. So I don't know how to read that chart.
I don't know, but I hate the dependency to like have to use so much lotion because of the if it's too dry, then my skin just fucking dries out. So obviously then I have to use lotion. But then if it's too moist, then I sweat a lot. So I have to shower more. So then I have to use even more. It's like that's why I think, I understand why people don't want to go outside. And it's like the constant need to be moisturizing or fucking drying or like wicking to make it so that it's just not uncomfortable to be sitting or like existing. It's a battle. Like I think that's why anymore I try to find the most wicking but softest fabrics. Um just knowing that it's like as soon as anything that's not meant to have moisture on it gets like in the slightest bit of, sweat or whatever, then it's just gonna stick to you and be fucking uncomfortable and it's not gonna move with you. And like buying or finding clothes that don't do that, it makes existing way more easy. Just because then you don't have to actually like when it would normally start to happen with other clothing, it doesn't pull you out of whatever you're doing. Where I know when I start to get uncomfortable, then I can't think about anything else. It's like it literally draws all of my mental attention to the point where if I don't do something about it, then it becomes like it like boils over into like seething rage where I'm like, I can't deal with this. And I think everybody has like a limit to where they hit, but mine's like way lower to the point, and I think part of it is like, I had to wear a uniform to school growing up. So like when you have to wear a fucking shirt and tie every day, that that shit starts to become very restrictive mentally. It's like there's like a psychosomatic response to it. And that's where I'm like, I don't blame people for not having it if they don't have to fucking if they didn't have to wear a shirt and tie for like, you know,
To go to school.
The formative years of their life. Because it's like, it's not even just about going to school. It's like when you're growing, when you're like expanding into space, and this thing is literally a fucking like it's collaring you. It takes on more, especially as you're growing, like, and you might be in a shirt, or like the size needs to go up and you haven't caught it yet, and then you're like, oh shit, I'm wearing a size 14 and I need to be in a 15 or whatever, and like that, but you still have to wear it. So you can't not go through the whether it's just a day or a week or however long it takes to replace the old clothing that you've grown out of, having to wear that and then not being able to like unbutton the top button and be more casual about it because you'll get in trouble, you get a detention. They don't care if your shirt's too small, because if it's buttoned up, it's only going to, it's going to look weird. Your head's going to look big, but people aren't going to realize your head looks big because of your collar. Like, oh, he's just a kid. His head's fucking big. That's it. They're not going to be like, oh, he needs to get a slightly larger shirt. Because I know I wasn't the only one that had that, but that's where I'm like looking back on it, like, oh yeah, when these motherfuckers had these like extra large looking heads, they just probably needed a bigger shirt.
There were a few people, and I don't remember their names, but I remember them having big heads, like disproportionately large skulls for the size of their, you know, their frames at the time.
And I mean, to be fair, I think most kids' heads are pretty big for their bodies until it gets to be like puberty, basically, and that's
Yeah.
that's when then the body starts to be too big for the head, and then things are just all out of whack, and it's like, yeah, being not in your adult body is just constantly being disproportioned, and I think that's where I think it's easy to get in that mindset and like carry those dysmorphias into adulthood, but there's ways to break out of it, but I just don't know if people are shown those ways, which is where I think a lot of, men and women carry dysmorphias from when they're younger. Like, okay, for example, our age group, because baggy clothes were really popular, I think both men and women just didn't know what they looked like, because when they were transitioning into like man and womanhood from teenager dumb or whatever you want to like, and it's not just youth, it's like from being a teenager into a grown person, everybody's clothes were so uh there was so much fabric that I think a lot of people just didn't even know what they looked like. And so when that baggy period went out, nobody really knew how to dress. And then a lot of people didn't go through the extra effort of like learning how to dress their own bodies. And then a lot of them just became frumps, men and women. And there's this like frumpiness acceptance where people are just like, oh, I'm just frumpy. And it's like, no, you just never learned to dress your body specifically. And then people escaped into frumpiness as an excuse when it was like if you, I remember when they did Queer Eye for the Straight Guy, and then they also had What Not to Wear. And what I was realizing was like, oh, it don't matter what shape your body is, it's how you put clothes on to accent that shape and present a silhouette. And like everybody has to do that. It don't matter if you actually like if you have a perfect body, if you put on a fucking box silhouette, your body's gonna look boxy. It don't matter if you have the best body on earth. Like your clothes can fucking hide that. And at the same time, if you have a body that's not like what shape you necessarily want it to be, there's ways to contour it into a different silhouette. And other people may be like, oh, that's lying or whatever. But it's like everybody presents their best self. And there's like there's a line where we know people have crossed into surgery for gender affirmation, but also for what they believe to be aesthetic enhancement. And so when we have performance enhancing drugs, there should be some sort of like conceptual equivalent for, I know they call it enhanced in like science fiction, but it doesn't always have a good outcome, which is why I think that's kind of like a misnomer in that if you get too many plastic surgeries, then the outcome may not actually enhance the person's aesthetics. And I think boomers learn that shit too late. And then on the other side, you got Gen Z that is, I don't know if there any of them, like, there's Gen Z where they're getting like BBLs and fucking Botox as teenagers, and that's the extreme. But then there's like the counterculture to that, which is like, I think people are going to be more natural on the whole, because I think the young people getting the surgeries are the extreme now. They're not the norm, even though it's not uncommon for that to exist. I think we're past the peak phase where like I know when I was in grad school, there were people who I wouldn't expect to be getting Botox to be getting that were getting Botox. I'm like, you're like 30. You shouldn't be getting Botox at like 30. And now I don't know if they regret it, but they can't really undo it. So they have to keep down that path. So that's where the effects of that on the older generation, I think, has made at least a significant portion of the younger generation averse to like any sort of plastic surgery. And then you get the like Ozempic face thing now. Have you seen The Boys?
Yeah.
So the guy that plays Mother's Milk on there, his I think it's like Lonzo, or I don't know his real name off the top of my head. People thought they like recast him because dude's got Ozempic face now, where I'm like, it doesn't look right. It doesn't look normal. And the idea that somebody would rather do that than carry a little extra weight or whatever, you know, the result of not taking Ozempic is I, I don't know who's telling him that that looks better. Like what and I guess part of it though is then once it's done, I don't know if you can undo Ozempic face. So then people are probably not going to tell him it looks worse because then that would just encourage him to get more fucking surgery or some shit to undo it.
He really does look like a different dude.
Yeah. Yeah, he definitely does. I mean,
Completely different jaw.
yeah.
There's
It
no cheeks.
Ozempic fucks your face up, man. You're not supposed to lose weight that fast.
His completely different jaw. His face looks. Wow. Wow. He looks more like the Avatar character than he really should. I mean, is he happy with it though? I mean, maybe he's like happy.
I mean, it, these people all say the same thing and they're always lying about it too cuz he's saying he's just working out harder. Like no motherfucker, you're on Ozempic. We know you're on Ozempic. Your face says you're on Ozempic. That don't happen when you just work out. Like your face doesn't start sagging like that when you just work out. Even if you take steroids, especially if you take steroids, your face, it like your ears get bigger, your nose gets bigger, but it don't sag. Like your lips don't start sagging like fucking Sherman Klump after he's turned like switching back and forth between Buddy Love and stuck in the middle of a transformation. Like that's Ozempic. But he's lying about it. So I'm like, I don't know. I mean, obviously I don't know him personally either, but when somebody is lying about how they lost weight and making it seem like they're happy, I can't trust that they are happy because they had to take fucking a diabetic weight loss pill to get to that point. So I'm of the mind that somebody who's in the place to do that isn't actually going to be happy when they get to a certain weight because they have body dysmorphia and weight loss doesn't solve body dysmorphia. So that's to me the biggest problem.
Yeah, it actually probably makes it worse.
It does. It absolutely does make it worse. That's the biggest problem with trying to solve body dysmorphia with the scale. That just makes it worse. And I don't know if solving body dysmorphia is even really possible once people have it. I think you can just redistort their perceptions of themselves. So it's like they're just gonna see a different like a different version than the one that they hated. You can get them to see a version that they don't hate, but it's very hard to get people to see a version that they love. And that is the biggest issue because then if you see something that you don't love, you will pay any amount of fucking money on the planet to get to a place where you think you'll love it, but it never actually happens because learning to love yourself isn't something that happens from fucking changing your appearance.
Yeah,
ironically. Ironically. It sounds obvious when you say it out loud, but of course nobody understands how to do it. So I think that's part of it is like a lot of these people are growing. What's funny to me is like, I think I can understand it from watching drag queens be able to be so resilient against a society that doesn't give them a network, but then also a lot of times they have families who don't give them a network. And I'm trying to figure out like what gives them this power to like portray this persona. And it comes from self-love in a way where like I think especially cishet people, don't get taught to learn to love themselves or make it seem like it's valuable. And then when you do, it's like made to be either about vanity or narcissism, or then it's being associated with being gay. So it's like all of the things that are associated with um like how society would perceive as loving oneself are then compartmentalized in ways where a cishet male is then not only not encouraged to examine these things, they're like pushed away from these things. And the only reason I'm even coming to this conclusion is because I'm seeing like it's not just me. There's like a phenomenon of trans men who, after they transition, they are like hyper lonely. And because they don't have a network of people like that they can just lean on to share their emotions with, it's like this, it's creating this new wave of depression in trans men who were like, they're not depressed because they didn't want to transition. They're depressed because now they're men and they don't have emotional support groups. And so seeing that, I'm like, oh, that's also a lot of it's the same cause for depression in a lot of cishet males, but it doesn't get addressed because the things that you need to do to close those gaps are then labeled as, like I said, it's either then narcissism or just they're just gonna full on be like, oh, that's gay, and in a pejorative way. And so when our society does those things, then you get a lot of dudes who hate everyone, including themselves, and then we all have to deal with it, and we all have to walk around coexisting with these dudes who don't know how to fucking enjoy life. They don't know how to fucking love themselves, and then they externalize in, that lack of capability to express love in any direction as just general hate. And they're so desensitized to it that that's their just baseline existence. It's like, this is why if you go on a fucking Xbox live chat, it's just a bunch of fucking kids being racist and a bunch of adults being racist. God forbid an actual black person get on the chat, then they get extra racist and probably throw homophobia in there too, just for fucking, the sake of making sure people understand who's not welcome. And those spaces obviously are not warm for women either. So it's like knowing the root of those behaviors, but then also seeing society like coddle young white men and then not like the way white men feel like learning about history is a personal attack on them is the result of them not being made to deal with anything ever in their lives. And in this like lack of actual obstacle or lack of any sort of pushback in their homes or from society, then it makes them even less likely to understand what those things actually mean, which is why you're like, you'll see white guys be like, oh, affirmative action is actually racist against white people. And then when you get the racist against white people crowd, those are the least uh, the people who've had the least amount of obstacle in their lives to get over, but they've been told that everyone else is just as entitled to that same peace, even though that's not what everybody else is going through. Like the peace of mind that one has when you know society is not actually out to get you, and you know that society isn't systematically built against you, they make it seem like the actual minorities have that peace of mind and we can operate as if things are equal. And then when you're lied to and told that's how black people exist and that's how black people or any other minority in this country exists, then you can believe that we have a victim mentality and it's black people's fault for not overcoming the system. And when those people are fed that lie and are made to believe that lie, then they think that they can ascend to the elite status in whitedom that they will never, ever, ever achieve, no matter what they do in their lives. And that to me is like, it's like a Shakespearean tragedy where it'd really be hilarious. It would really be funny if like it didn't affect real people. And then you're like, oh, this is really sad because it affects real people. And then it's funny because of how devoted these people are to lying to themselves, into deceiving themselves, into thinking that they will ascend to elite status one day. And in doing so, are willing to do all these terrible, terrible things that now it's resulting in fucking 95-mile-an-hour windstorms that aren't tornadoes, that aren't hurricanes, and it's not even a social rebellion. When you're talking about an ecological rebellion against your activities, that to me is when we're hitting this phase of civilization where nature is literally going to wipe out the things that don't work. And I feel like dumb people would call it an act of God because they just don't pay attention to like cycles. But the problem becomes then it's like that has nothing to do with a God or any sort of existence of a higher power. This is just like a bunch of people fucking up this one ecosystem to the point that the ecosystem has started to like activate its own immune system, where we're seeing it play out in real time. Like, oh, you melt the ice caps, well, you'll flood all the fucking coastal regions. You flock to the coastal regions and fucking dig up a bunch of oil. Well, those are the places that's going to get wiped out. And then suddenly you're not going to use as much oil and the earth is going to start moving back to equilibrium. And so when they're like, oh, it's past the point of no return, well, that's for us. And I'm perpetually of the mind that the scientists who use the doomsday clock aren't really like doing anybody any favors by using that metaphor, because the people we're dealing with aren't.
Let's just be honest. The people that we're dealing with don't know how to read an analog clock face, anyways. They're probably still on the sundial or something absurd.
But it's like, I feel like, okay, you couldn't use the return of Christ, you couldn't use the Antichrist, but you could potentially use like the next great flood, where it's plausible, and the outcome of the great flood is like a new start. And I feel like Christians could definitely be tricked into thinking a great flood has happened, because enough bad flooding has happened where like they just have to be the people of the right color. Because it's like, what was it? I think it was Taiwan or something, had 100,000 people die from from a flood. Wherever, or Indonesia, wherever it was, they weren't white enough. It just has to be like people white enough where, like, say if Venice had like a bunch of tourists who were, French and British people, if there was like, I don't even think it has to be 100,000, maybe like 4,000 British people and maybe 1,000 French people, because nobody really cares about French people that much. Like, if it was like that many people that died, then suddenly you could convince a bunch of American white people that it was like the apocalypse, but the Great Flood version where you get another chance. And then it would be like, oh, it's raining in Dubai, and you carry on the ruse to go with the weather patterns just for like, just long enough to make it seem like they went through some biblical shit, even though nothing's actually happening in America the whole time.
So, like,
So
the whole flood thing, I've always found it interesting because, like, that was back in those days, humans lived, almost 1,000 years. But really, it can be, we can account for it for the number of moon times the moon would cycle around the Earth, and that could kind of reconstruct like a reasonable lifespan, long lifespan back then. But still, so maybe 40 days and 40 nights is more like 40 hours and 40 minutes. It rained for like 2 days, and a bunch of people died. But it was really just like one valley because the Chinese didn't record a 40-day flood, and the Egyptians don't have records of 40-day floods, and there'd be other there would be records of this all over the place, but there aren't.
so I like tried to go along with that. I had this a very similar thought, and it kind of works until you get back to Genesis, and then you realize that like the days are literally dependent on the like rising and setting of the sun. So it's like, no, there's no confusion about what's meant to be a day. The issue becomes, it's like it's a curse. So like they're not disputing that humans now live to about 120 years as a max. It was that before God cursed humans, they could live to be like 1,000 years. And like, then once God, the humans broke the covenant and God cursed them, then he limited it to 120 years. So like, it's only crazy in that they're claiming people used to live 1,000 years. They're not actually like misunderstanding how long a day is. It's a matter of, they're also not saying everybody lived that long. So it was like, the reason Methuselah gets fucking marked down is because he lived that long, supposedly, not because, oh, everybody lived to be fucking 932, and here's this dude Methuselah who was also around at that time. It's like, no, this is like the line of the lineage of Adam, who were God's creation, and the ones who were like offspring of Adam would live a very, very long time in that family or in that bloodline in particular, which is technically supposed to be the origin of divine right in the West, where like they think that some of them have the blood of Christ in their fucking family still. And it's like, supposedly there's documentation somewhere to trace lineage back, which is the basis of all these like mythologies around like the Bible Code and Da Vinci Code and all this shit, where they had these like
they need the blood of Christ or his like most closest descendant that has the active gene, so that they can engage the hand of God and bring about the rapture or something like that. No, rapture isn't too young. What's a really ancient like?
No,
bring
no,
about
the
end of
rapture.
times?
No, they don't have anything to do with the rapture. They're supposed to be like the person who is controlling
The God
they
machine.
control no, they control Earth. Like Earth is the domain of man, and the person who is ordained by God is meant to be the King of Kings over men, and Jesus is the King of Kings over all kings. So it's like, this is why Lucifer was upset, because Lucifer was then inferior to men in that he didn't have dominion over earth. And this is where the story of Job is like God giving Lucifer a chance to like fuck with a man and giving him dominion over earth, but only over this like one dude, to prove that um if God didn't reward people, they would all fucking curse his name. And then it was like Job had to keep getting escalated before he finally cursed God. But it was like, at the time, the way that it happens in the story, it's like by the time it escalates to that point, everybody knows that it's like, okay, took everything, you fucking gave him boils on his body, fucking killed his bloodline, like took his crops, took his fucking riches. So it's like, yeah, this guy has nothing left. Like, he has nothing to be thankful for. So like, you kind of can't blame him at that point. So like, it kind of like it doesn't really prove Lucifer's point, because it took so much to get him to that point. Because even then, I don't even. It's like he doesn't even curse God. He like questions God. So it's like, it's not even like a full on fuck you. It's like, dude, what did I do? Like, I tried to do everything. Why do you curse me? And so even at that, that's where like the idea is, because humans have like this realm over which we have control, and we have beasts of burden, and we're supposed to make it into this garden, like we're supposed to be turning it into a nice place. But the rapture is then like coming back and basically checking on our progress, and then being like, oh no, you fucked up, so now we're going to have like this battle between good and evil, because you didn't you didn't sow enough seeds of good, and so now there's evil. And so it was like they didn't understand the metaphors, and then it became literal. Like when Jesus is like, I'm gonna like I'm gonna leave and I'm not gonna tell you when I'm coming back. It's a fucking metaphor. He's literally saying a metaphor for like, I can't tell you when I would come back, because then if 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 someone has a garden and they leave and they have servants to tend the garden, the servants are just gonna fuck off until the day before, and then they're gonna fix the garden. So I can't tell you when I'm coming back because you would just fuck off. So I'm gonna tell you I'm coming back, but not tell you when, so you all be good. And that's literally how it's said. So it's not, and it's like the idea that it's meant to be a literal return is the abstracted manipulative version of what's there, because that's not actually there. And so that's why when you like look at the grand scheme of domain, and then why we have kings and queens in the West now that also are like intertwined with the church. But it's also like, okay, this is the funny part about like Charles and Camilla and like, all the way going back to Henry, is like these motherfuckers wanted to get divorced and they wanted to like make it seem like, oh shit, I know I married this person, but that was a mistake. Well, if you're ordained by God, you can't fucking make mistakes like that. So the religion originally reflected that, but that's where effectively the Protestant church kind of splits off and is like, this thing, we need to actually protect the capacity to get divorced. And that's like it's not the only split, but it's one of the major splits where then there's obviously you know, the church selling fucking like um the capacity to wash your soul by paying for it. Um where it's like that's another huge place where the church splits, but it it's fractured in so many places, but then in the West it becomes homogenized for the sake of being juxtaposed against like Islam, that if you're not really deep into religious study or religion, Christianity is going to seem a lot more monolithic than it is. It's not even remotely monolithic, let alone homogenous, but it does that for the sake of appearances when Islam or Judaism is brought up or comes into the conversation. And I think that's where it becomes really difficult to like parse out, like, do Westerners really believe in divine right? Not really. They just use it to fucking protect nobility, is what it comes down to. And that's where you get like the mythos about the Catholic Church and why they kept things in Latin and wanted to keep power. And there's all these elements of like the possibility that they are protecting something mystic and something that's like esoteric in knowledge, when in reality, when you look at the history, the only thing that's really esoteric is protecting literacy from accessibility, so then they can use manipulative tactics in the open. And I think that's where like spirituality and religiosity have kind of become interchangeable in the Western lexicon. when they're obviously not interchangeable at all. But that's also why you get a lot of Westerners who then reject spirituality because the religious frameworks here are almost exclusively about mass manipulation. And nobody has any really good experiences with religion in that they're just built to like get get you in a position where you're giving them money frequently and not thinking about what they're doing with the money. Um, and
Yeah, what
knowing
does
that
religion do with the money? I mean,
exactly,
other than promote itself.
exactly, exactly, exactly.
I mean, I know that
So
there are religious organizations that they champion, giving to, providing resources to people that they decide need resources. And I know that sometimes they provide relief aid to areas that are hit by, like hurricanes in the Caribbean. There used to be that entire infomercial that was like feed the children, but I'm pretty sure that they weren't feeding anybody except themselves. I remember when I was younger, there was like a concentrated effort to get people to like donate to support, provide relief aid for war torn countries and areas that had like no agricultural infrastructure. And I don't see that anymore. Now what I read off the internet is we're sending too much money to places. We need to spend less money on other places. And of course, that's from like conservative media. I guess, I mean, just from that, has world hunger and starvation been solved? And they just didn't tell anyone?
no, those things you were talking about were scams. They weren't actually doing anything.
No, I know, I know. That's what I get. Like, and so it's so of course that means that people are still starving somewhere, and there's still areas that have like zero agricultural infrastructure. Just nobody wants to talk about it anymore at all.
I mean, what can anybody do about it? Because you can't
They've already figured out that
start.
there's nothing left to do. We can't do anything because the people who have
Well,
the
you,
stuff to distribute don't want to distribute it, and the people who could distribute it aren't getting paid enough.
well, here's the problem. If you have an NGO that has whatever to distribute, then there can't be a local economy in that thing. So you start distributing food. Well, you can't have fucking grocery stores if some NGO is coming in, like just giving people food. And it sucks that one thing negates the other, but because they aren't going through the proper stages of building infrastructure, it's like, yeah, you may have millions of people in a region and you need to get them food, but there's arable land that's not being used because of X, Y, and Z. And instead of going through the steps where they can start being self-sufficient, it's actually easier just to send in an NGO with a bunch of food and
Man,
give
that's like
everybody
the
food.
most hardcore version of gentrification.
It is. That's how colonialism looks in 2024. It looks like an NGO coming in and fucking giving everybody a bunch of shoes or giving everybody a bunch of clothes, not realizing, I mean, maybe realizing that, yeah, now suddenly they can't have an economy around whatever you just came in to do. And the issue is they need to be given time to grow and time for that economy or that part of their infrastructure to grow instead of just trying to like fast forward them into modernity, air quotes, heavy air quotes, because the modernity we have doesn't really work. So like they should be fostering more sustainable solutions anyway, instead of just trying to like solve single problems at a time via NGO white saviorism. And I think the problem is like a lot of the resources that are being used to quote unquote save these places got stolen from these places in the first place. So it's like this is why full circle divine right to control resources is problematic, because you have a bunch of people who are raised to believe that the fucking British crown has the rights over everything, let alone the rights to fucking minerals in Africa, anywhere in Africa, let alone the furthest southernmost tip of the continent. Like, they shouldn't have fucking shit to do with anything on that goddamn continent, sake the fact that they use their religious philosophy turned into national philosophy to make it appear more secular via military industrial as a way to, it's like colonialism is violent gentrification. Gentrification is nonviolent colonialism. It's basically they're the other end of the spectrum for each one. And that's why it is like when you see it, I wasn't aware of the NGO problem until I started to see it up close for myself. Main thing being it's gonna be impossible to understand. And one of the biggest things that's hard to understand is like, okay, you go to the poorest place on earth. Well, guess what? People don't fucking measure themselves by how much money they have. Sorry, capitalists. That shit don't work there. They've had to learn how to be content without money so long that they don't measure their contentment by that. So you see people like walking around with pride, walking around happy in the poorest place on the fucking planet, because they're not beholden to this mind prison that makes them think they need to have like a Scrooge McDuck fucking vault of cash before they're worthy of being called sir or being called ma'am or being treated with respect.
Scrooge McDuck.
And so, yeah, I mean, Scrooge McDuck was a villain at first.
Yeah.
And then he turns into like the endearing uncle or grandfather or whatever the fuck
Uncle
he was.
Scrooge.
And it's like after a while, you got to wonder like, what is this character meant to instill in children? Because at first it's like it's clear he's a bad guy, but after, when you're like, oh no, the rich uncle, he's cool, he's gonna help us on our adventures, and you're like, this is for like 7-year-olds, man. They shouldn't be like seeing some dude swim around in fucking money. You know what I mean? Like,
I just want to point out that the physics of a duck swimming through coins is just...
No, he's like Superman
I
fucking
know.
strong.
He's gotta be incredibly fit. Like, no wonder he was going on all those adventures and whooping so much ass with a cane. And like, he was a super duck. He just didn't wear a cape. He wore spats and a top hat. A muscle duck is like capitalism's like superhero. Is basically what that means.
Well, and like Richie Rich, who the fuck is that for? Knowing damn well 99.99% of the kids reading or being around Richie Rich, because I never really knew anybody that read that shit. Like, who wants to read that shit? Where you're like, oh, this kid that fucking has everything, let me read his adventures and then have to eat fucking Cheerios with water. Yeah, I'm gonna do that. Who wants to do that? Let me go eat this fucking government grilled cheese sandwich and fucking read some Richie Rich comic books. What? Who the fuck is Richie Rich for, man? You know what I mean? Like, and shit like that where I'm like, okay, I know there's niche stuff where somebody appreciates it, but then there's definitely propaganda.
I always
And
got a kick out of like Johnny Quest getting in trouble and then requiring Haji to use some like mysticism to save the day. I watched that because I was always like, I wonder how badly Johnny's gonna screw it up for him and what Haji's gonna do to save their asses.
well, I'm glad we had Johnny Quest just for the sake that it gave us Venture Brothers.
Yeah.
'Cause I feel like if we didn't get Johnny Quest, Venture Brothers wouldn't have been as genius as it is. Um, but
The moment when they find Johnny after like 30 years in the bottom of the ocean in the submarine, he's wearing piss stained boxer or briefs and he's got a horribly unkept face. He looks crazy.
but like, how many stereotypes do you think we can thank Johnny Quest alone for?
Oh, I think every single character in that story was a stereotype. Every one of them. There were no like NPCs like they're just running about in the background. Every one of the henchmen was a stereotype.
Yeah, yeah.
Is any media from that era like free of stereotypes though? I'm pretty sure that entire era of cartoons was just all stereotypes and Grape Ape. Ugh.
Well, and like for no reason though, and I think that's where it can, obviously in the context of Venture Brothers, it can be done to satirize and make a point. But when it's just there and there's not even really like some larger intended point for using that, it does feel so gratuitously racist where no and then knowing in the Simpsons and Family Guy context that these like stereotypical characters are being played by white people, then it's like, okay, this is definitely not innocuous. This is not just, oh, we're having fun. Oh, we're having fun. It's acting. It's acting. Like, no, you wanted to make fun of black people, or you wanted to make fun of Indian people, and you wanted to make fun of Chinese people, and you wanted to do it in a place where you thought we wouldn't see it, or you weren't getting any repercussions, so you didn't care if we saw it. And either one of those things is not good, but I think over time, it became less and less possible for those things to exist without some sort of repercussion if the audience being mocked ended up seeing it. And I think that's the part that people, obviously people don't want repercussions for their actions, but there was this like, oh yeah, even if gay people saw Eddie Murphy say the F word during his stand-up, what are they gonna do? They couldn't cancel him then. So the way people would like double down on their bigotry. Oh yeah. So this girl, well, I don't know I don't know how old she's got a kid, so I'm assuming she's a woman. This woman puts out this TikTok video basically using the N-word, the N-word with an A, not the hard R version. People call her out and she's like, "Oh, I manipulated you and you did exactly what I wanted to because you're just dumb black people and you're easily manipulated." Doubles, triples down. Well, turns out the company she worked for was owned by a black woman, fired before the weekend's over. So she puts out this video on, I think, like a Friday. By Monday, her job is gone. And she's like, well, guess what? Thank you for giving me, now I've got my right-wing grifter credits, or, my right-wing credits, and I'm going to be a right-wing media personality. And she's like, so confident that her getting fired is going to make her even more popular with right-wingers. Well, that starts and it works for like 24 hours, and right wingers like, yeah, look at this woman using the N word. Well, not too long into that, somebody starts looking at her TikToks and they're like, I think she has a black kid. And then the right wingers start getting mad that she has a black kid, or I guess it would be mixed race. So, like, strike one. Then suddenly they're looking at her and like, I don't know, her jawline's kind of strong. I think she might be a man. Now suddenly she's being transvestigated. Strike two. And this lady is like still sticking with the right wing. And I'm like, I don't know what it takes for people to get in a spot where they think that they can just like use media to manipulate people, knowing here, I guess here's the issue. There's enough people now that know media attempts to manipulate to the point that they can't tell when it's an attempt to manipulate versus like real media. And I think like, I don't think anybody's perfect. There's like no perfect way to know if something's real or something is an attempt to manipulate. Like recently Dana White, quote unquote, walked off a podcast. Well, fake as shit. They definitely set it up. They definitely planned it out beforehand. It went slightly viral, but I think enough people saw it and were like, this looks fake. And then it just kind of like disappeared. And well, yeah, it was fake. So like the way something like that is meant to kind of like grab people's attention and go viral, and then them not tell you if it's fake or not to keep it viral, that shit doesn't work as much anymore because people start to polarize really quickly. And so you can't have these like, oh, I said the N word to manipulate you into like making me go viral, and then not having a sub. It's like, did you see that Rick and Morty episode where every time someone is like not decisive, it like splits the universe?
Yeah.
It's like every time someone takes a stance on something, the audience polarizes. And it's like, then you come down on one of those polarized stances and it polarizes again in a way where you're like, wait, hold up. I didn't even say anything that you could potentially polarize. It's like, okay, if you make a statement like, oh, I really like waffles, and then suddenly comes on, why do you hate fucking potatoes? And you're like, I didn't say anything about potatoes. I just said I really like waffles. And suddenly the people who are like,
well, I make my waffles out of potatoes.
And it's like, then you get people coming on, well, what do you have against waffle fries? And then they like throw it into even more confusion. And these subsequent it's like, there's like the rule that if there's a comment section, there's only amount of time before one of the comments becomes racist. And I think this is where like now we've become so polarized that if you like make a statement, it's going to cause instant polarization. to the point there's no it's like really difficult to get a consistent support audience. Like football teams, basketball teams, musicians, it's really hard to get anybody to agree on anything. Like the last real person people have agreed on was like Taylor Swift, maybe. Um,
Yeah, they agreed to give her a ton
it
of
en
fucking
masse,
money.
en masse. Where I'm like, and obviously she has a ton of detractors, but she has enough mass behind her that like there's there's a name for her fans. Like I don't I, I don't know if I mean I'm out of touch. It's very possible that I'm just
No,
completely
no,
out of touch.
nope. They have a name.
No, I know they have a name, but I'm saying like I don't know anybody since Taylor Swift who has accumulated enough like-minded people where people are willing to call themselves that thing. Everybody calls themselves Swifties because they like if they're like enough of a Taylor Swift fan, you're a Swiftie. Like that transcends a lot of things to those creep like the way juggalos like juggalo culture transcends everything else to them. To Swifties, to the Beehive, like Beyonce transcends basically everything. Like if you had to ask somebody to choose Beyonce or their country, the Beehive is gonna choose Beyonce. It don't matter what country they're from. They could be from fucking America. They could be from Thailand. They could be from Israel. They could be from fucking Greece. The Beehive is gonna choose. They are pledging allegiance to Beyonce. I promise you,
Oh
before
wow.
any fucking country, which is, you know, in a way, it's kind of admirable in that, like, I'm not like standing anybody like that, but the people who are at least willing to go that hard in that, it's like weird to do it for a person, definitely weird, but that person's at least like just an entertainer and just trying to like bring people joy. Whereas like Beyonce's not fucking setting up Stinger missiles and like annexing countries and fucking, you know.
Okay, so just the idea of Beyonce firing a stinger is highly entertaining to me. Like I just I'm imagining going very poorly, like very very poorly for everyone within like 15 feet of her. In my mind, I'm sure this doesn't. I mean, I can't be sure of anything actually. In my mind, what happens is very similar to when you see this very small frame person on YouTube try and fire one of those giant hand cannon revolvers, and it swings back and hits him in the face. But this is a shoulder mounted like missile.
Which again, like
Like I imagine it launches her forward and into the ground.
there's like mixed martial artists out doing that shit where I can't fucking I can't fuck with mixed martial artists as a fan. I watch the shit out of mixed martial arts, but you can't be like, oh, I'm a fan of so and so, because as soon as you say that, there'll be a video of them. Oh,
I just bought a Stinger missile. I'm going to blow up a helicopter that I also bought.
Hanging out with some fucking Chechnyan warlord. And, you know, fuck this person now. I wish I was exaggerating. Like,
Yeah.
no, man, there's videos of too many fucking mixed martial artists like out shooting weapons with the fucking Chechnyan warlord, where it's like, well, I guess this is a fucking toxic ass place and a bunch of toxic ass people. It sucks that martial arts are cool and so many shitty people have to fucking practice them.
it's not martial arts fault.
It's
Like
not. So
like they
yeah, I don't
even
blame
even
martial arts.
even like even horrible people can like cool stuff too. Like awesome stuff is not beholden to you know just the people with awesome technology. Some people, bad people get that stuff too. And it's just, I think that's just the nature of, that's human nature itself. We have to contend with like the dark side of humanity and can't be extinguished. Everything would be gray, off white, or, one of those shades. But that's more of a spiritual thing. Like, can we even appreciate how good things are if we can't reflect upon something like, that gives us a scale or a scope for what we're looking at? Like, is the subjective experience really, is that it? Is that the defining factor in all this stuff? Because somebody thinks that MMA person is cool as hell, and they want to be just like them, and they want to go hang out with the Chechen warlords too.
Well, and it's like in those moments, those MMA guys are like on top of the world in their own minds, but then
Yeah.
at their lowest, they are the most worthless individuals in their own mind. I'm not calling them worthless. That's how they see themselves. And that's where you see a lot of like um manic depression in mixed martial artists. And God, I wish they would just fucking get a goddamn therapist for the UFC and just have them like just not even antagonizing people, just like okay, apparently a lot of the OnlyFans women are actually drag queens pretending to be those women and like talking to the dudes. It's like I wish a therapist would just pretend to be like a fucking slutty woman that's like sexting dudes all day, but is actually a therapist. And it's like that's the only way. It's the only way you're gonna get these dudes to fucking interact with a therapist. Is like hide the behind the slutty fucking fake profile. Then they'll talk to him all day.
They will pay top dollar
Tell
to
him
talk to him.
everything. Yeah.
Everything.
You know what? Maybe we're on to
Did we just
something.
create a whole new uh, industry,
Yeah.
mental health industry, or like branch of the mental health care industry? The OnlyFans psychiatrist. Oh man, that brings a whole. That's like a whole different level to the shrink. Shrink the wallet even faster.
Well, and okay, the only reason I even say shit like that is because I don't know if you've heard of Sean Strickland.
No.
But he's this guy who like very famously within the mixed martial arts community is like anti-emotion and like will shit on any person and like oh you show emotion like oh your dog died you're a fucking bitch for showing emotion. Well, this dude's dog died recently and he's like I finally get it, maybe I was being too harsh on people. And it's like man, this is what I mean when these people have like never gone through anything in their lives. It's like, oh, if you're like 35, 36 years old and it's like the first time you're losing an animal in your life, I
Now,
feel bad for him. Like he's definitely emotionally stunted, but it's like, oh, I get why you like want to go out and bully people who you think are emotionally stunted because you're emotionally stunted. And there is like part of me that doesn't want to then go emotionally bully that person because I know they're like they have some shit to deal with. But that's the type of person, the only thing they understand is bullying. And we have this like class of male that is like, when people like carrot or stick, and it's like, well, some people you have to beat them with the carrot too. You can't just let them eat the carrot. You have to fucking hit them with the carrot too. And it seems like Sean Strickland is one of those people where it's like they've just become so desensitized. Because
Is one carrot enough though?
dude, no, it's not. Okay. So those like carnivals where it's basically like a death trap and everybody's playing Russian roulette, just getting on those. Well, this weekend, one of those carnival rides like got lost power in the middle of the ride. So you had I think it was like 75 to 100 people stuck hanging upside down for about 30 minutes. And they had to like manually bring these people down because you don't know if you turn the power back on, well, their fucking harnesses might unlock. That might be it might reset to default and then their harnesses unlock. So they didn't know if once they got the power back on, if the fucking shit was gonna unlock or stay locked. So they had to manually bring this I forget the name of the thing, but it's stupid. Like the Scaratron or whatever, like Invertitron, whatever it is. It's a stupid fucking name. It's a stupid fucking ride, and nobody should have gone on it because
it was in Portland, Oregon. It was the Atmosphere.
Yeah,
30 people were stuck upside
name.
down on the thing for several hours, it looks like.
Oh, it was 30 people for several hours. Okay, so that's where I guess I saw it happening. Like people were posting about it on Twitter, where I'm seeing people posting about it, and they're like posting like, "Oh, they're clearing us out of the park," because people were on a Ferris wheel and they're like taking video of it.
Okay, ABC like, says it was only about half an hour according to ABC.
That's what I thought. But regardless, the people then were like, I thought we were just gonna be on there for a minute, but then I started getting worried about my life, and then I'm like, that's the problem. You've never worried about your fucking life before, so you have to get on these stupid fucking rides that turn you upside down, and then might turn off the power in the middle because you've never actually been scared for your life. So you're chasing that fucking dragon, and you got a bunch of people willing to put their lives at risk for nothing, for fucking nothing, because they haven't had enough pressure in their lives before. And so to me, when like those people are the ones I have to coexist with, and those people are also the ones who are like virulently racist and think black people are in that same mindset, like that's why black people don't do shit like that, because I don't have to fucking feel like I gotta be on the verge of death to be alive. Like, no, I've been scared for my life enough by fucking cops or whatever. I don't need that shit to feel alive.
Isn't your life already kind of a roller coaster as it is, just being black in America? Like that seems like it's stressful enough.
So no, I don't need to go fucking surfing. No, I don't need to go on a roller coaster.
Yeah, let's go out where the sharks are hanging out.
No, I don't need any of that shit. None of it. None of it. So
let's go diving for oysters in shark-infested waters.
But then when those people, like, you see what it takes for them to learn the lesson. They literally have to be hung upside down for half an hour and not made to know if they're going to fucking survive out of that shit or not. To, like, shake them out of that. and then you don't know if it's gonna stick. I don't know if that shit's gonna stick either. Like they're gonna have this like that might make their adrenaline chasing worse.
Well, now they have something to talk about, and I think it'll really just come down to the individual and how they respond to the lack of interest after they've told everyone the story.
Now they have an inversion fetish.
Yeah. Oh, they're gonna go get one of those stupid things that people hang on their door frames and fall down and land on their heads. With what are they? It's like those boot things that clip on. People get stuck in them all the time because they don't have enough abdominal strength to like do a fully inverted sit up and get unhooked from the boots, get their or boot clips unhooked.
Yeah, yeah. Takes a lot more lower ab strength than one would expect. I mean, I guess back strength too, but
Yeah, your entire core actually has to be strong enough to do that thing before anyone should actually try to do it. Because it's the kind of thing that, and maybe it doesn't happen very often, but I've definitely read about people getting stuck in exercise equipment, like home exercise equipment, because they were too ambitious and should have gone to the gym where somebody would have been there to help them. Said they wait a couple hours and oh, I'm not against like working out at home. I just think that there's some tools that are more advanced than they appear to be. Like I think a lot of exercise equipment is actually more sophisticated than they look. It's not obvious. Like especially exercise machines. Every gym I've ever been to, I've always looked at some of those machines like, man, that looks like it could really hurt you.
well, and they probably can. I
Yeah.
think it's very easy to hurt oneself if you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah. Every so often I read about somebody who's using like doing like they were exercising their back, like they were doing sit-ups like over the edge of something and then they give out and then they break their back. And it's like,
Oh
man,
God.
isn't it like enough to do like a sit up on the floor? Why would anyone feel like they have to do it with their like where they're suspended over nothing? Do they want to like hyperextend their back and get a big stretch in the middle of the sit up? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that because I'm not trying to do that. So I'm generally just afraid every time I read about it. It's like, oh god, they're probably gonna have like years of recovery, all for a sit up.
Yeah. I think we are getting closer to. Well, unfortunately, a lot of the steroid abusers have died and are dying. So you get this like it's like the the wave of steroid users is getting younger and younger because they're dying earlier and earlier. So now you have like 20-year-olds using fucking Tren and like
I see shorts
all
of
kinds of
people
anabolic
doing
shit.
like some of the craziest stuff, like really aggressive workout routine type things. And people doing like really advanced gymnastic stuff. And I'm good for them. I'm glad that they can do this stuff. But they're like, I see videos of people attempting these, like, I'm going to call them stunts because I don't see any practicality in any of this stuff. But what do I know? But they're doing these like physical stunts. And in any of these little 15-second clips, there's a moment where if things just go a little bit wrong, if they just were unlucky that day, they'd be in a hospital doing some of these things. And I guess it's like impressive, sort of. and it makes me wonder, like, how many of these do I need to watch before it's just like, okay, I've seen enough people doing this thing that I think is really like stupid, or the risk is definitely not worth the reward. Occasionally, I watch somebody like breaking stuff with their hands, and all I can think is like, they must not like doing anything with their hands. Have we gotten to a place where to even like be noticed, the performance has to be more extreme than the previous one? It can't just like meet the standard. It has to go way beyond and break down barriers and destroy expectations. And how come the descriptions for everything is so violent nowadays?
Yeah, our language started to get like, what's the
Beast
word?
mode, rage.
Right, desensitization to violence through like, well, and it goes back where like I remember very explicitly where somebody was like, words are violence, and I'm like, we can't start doing that where we're equating words with actual violence. But it was around, I think it was circa like 2004 where that was said, and I'm like, I get the sentiment, and words are having more violent rhetoric, and the words themselves are unnecessarily using violent imagery. Like slam, like the way slam got to be synonymous with like coming out at a person negatively. It's like, well, they make it seem like you're getting body slammed or some shit, and it's like that didn't happen overnight, and it was gradual. But I definitely remember where there was like this overcorrection at the beginning of it, where people were trying to make it seem like words themselves were like the equivalent of violence upon a person. And it's like you can definitely attack someone's being and you can attack their emotions, but let's not act like calling somebody a name is the equivalent of hitting them with a bat. Like
Oh
it's
yeah,
just not. It's just not. And the idea that they can be equated is really, it felt like it was being planted to undermine strife of actual people who are like suffering physical violence. Because then it's like, yeah, if the cops beat the shit out of somebody and suddenly words are the same as physical violence, then somebody getting insulted on the internet is the same as somebody getting the shit beat out of them by cops. Obviously not true.
yeah.
But, and this is where like mental exercises.
I mean, when I think of beast mode, I think of like Altered Beast and a coin-op video game from the '80s and on Genesis. But now it's a way to describe people who are going hard, because going hard wasn't hard enough apparently, and going hard is a happen that started happening because I guess throwing down wasn't enough either. Maybe I just find language really amusing, and that's really what it comes down to. Especially because the language that we speak in this country is so pretty dynamic.
It definitely, Well, and I think this is where it's not just America, it's like the internet.
Yeah.
Um it has to be more dynamic, but this is also where like a lot of African American vernacular English affects it, and then people try to absorb shit via the internet as if it's just like internet speak. And this is where full circle people are like, oh, you can just say the N word because it's just internet speak. But that's obviously not true. And it like occludes the attempt to reclaim the word as like a positive form of endearment between black people. Because I someone called me Naga, and I ended up like getting into a debate with the guy because he's clearly some right wing fuck, and he wanted to like have a debate about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And when we had this little debate on his show, I like pressed him on like why, like what Naga meant. And when he like admitted like, oh yeah, that was just me being cheeky, try to make a version of the N word. And I'm like, why would you want to say it? And the only reason he could come up with it was just to like basically try to antagonize me. And so that's where I'm like, knowing that when people do that, that's their entire intention, and that those people have a hard time perceiving others as human beings, that's when it's a lot easier to dismiss their opinions. Like if somebody can't perceive me as a human being enough to like not want to call me something that like makes me uncomfortable, I don't actually fucking care about that person's opinion. And it's a lot easier to get to that place when you know how sad they are, I think. And that's where I'm like, on the one hand, I don't want to interact with racist people. But on the other hand, like knowing how like much their lives fucking suck and how much all they can do is like sit on the internet and like shovel hate and try to like manipulate people into being outraged or being upset at them, it makes it a lot easier to like just keep it moving. Like I don't, not to say that they can bait me,
Man,
but it's even easier now to keep it moving.
And you just painted a picture of a person who wants attention so bad that they're willing to engage in racist language and incite just to antagonize people. Like that's just like probably the saddest person.
No, it's
then there's the
really
part of
sad.
that's like, man, poor bastard, boo hoo. Like at some point, people have to be responsible for their behavior, and it's. I'm not the person that is signing up to like unwrap that onion of. It's probably a rotten onion, whatever it is. Like somebody has to unwrap it and figure out what's going on, and I'm not that person. And you know, the person who needs that help, you know, hopefully they can find that help.
That's also why we have to.
That's why
pretend
we really
that help is like a slut behind
that's why we got a
OnlyFans profile.
Yeah, that's the OnlyFans psychiatry program. OFP. OFPP. There it is.
It's the only way to save the planet.
Oh, God. If OnlyFans is the thing that saves the modern man on the internet, then we've got way bigger issues. Oh man.
Exceptional radio.
Exceptional Randos shows produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Well, that was random.
Exceptional Radio.